Tucker Carlson tonight. In July of 1993, a radio station in Kigali, Rwanda, began openly attacking one of the country's main ethnic groups, the Tutsis. The radio station was called RTLM, but many remember it as simply Hutu Radio because its audience was primarily Hutu. According to Hutu Radio, Tutsi people were responsible for virtually every bad thing that ever happened in Rwanda. Tutsis had way too much money. They had way too much power. Tutsis were way too privileged. They were greedy. They were bigoted. They were racists. They were dangerous. Everything about Tutsiness was repulsive. For the most part, actual Tutsis in Rwanda ignored all of this. Hutu Radio was not aimed at them. But then, in July of 1994, just 9 months after RTLM went on the air, a genocide began in Rwanda. More than 500,000 Tutsis were murdered, in many cases by Hutus whose rage had been stoked to violence by RTLM's broadcasts. Entire Tutsi families were dragged from their homes and hacked to death with machetes. Hundreds of thousands of women were raped. The world watched in horror as it happened, but did nothing to intervene. Instead, our leaders told us at the time, the genocide in Rwanda would live forever as a lesson to the rest of us about the capacity for evil that lurks inside every human heart and the dangers of reducing our neighbors to the sum total of their ethnicity. They're individuals, not ethnic groups. Bill Clinton gave an eloquent speech actually on the subject in Kigali back in 1998. Look it up and ask yourself, as you read it, if any Democratic Party official could today say those same words. It's hard to imagine, given what plays on a loop on that party's cable news arm, MSNBC. Have you watched MSNBC lately? Likely you haven't. Like the Tutsis, you're not the target audience, but you should tune in sometime. It's remarkable. Given that opposing racism is America's national religion, it may surprise you to learn that open race hate forms much of the substance of that channel's programming. And when we say race hate, we're not referring to the subtle coded variety. You want border security? You giving your kids piano lessons? You like Shakespeare? You believe in the SAT? You must be a racist. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the kind of race hate you cannot mistake for anything else, the kind where people just come out and announce, I hate this race of people, and here's why I do. It's hard to believe that anything like that is happening right now on American television, but it is, out in the open. And the most amazing and the most creepy part of all is that no one is saying anything about it. It's all but ignored. And honestly, we had no idea what was going on either until we started getting texts from people. Are you watching this? Can you believe this? So we tuned in. Apparently on the left, what you're about to see is considered completely normal, even good. And that should worry you deeply. You don't want to live in Rwanda. But on MSNBC, they're already there. Now, you probably knew about Joy Reid, the race lady, who's been fixated on race hate for years now. But MSNBC has a new host, someone called Tiffany Cross, who hosts a show called The Cross Connection. Here's a selection.
Many of us have seen the dangers when powerful white people decide they want something, they annex it. And they've never had a problem replacing the people who stand in their way.
We see American white people are going crazy. They're resorting to violence.
This is literally what conservative white folks do when they don't get their way. They turn violent.
White people deputizing themselves in some position of authority to have jurisdiction over your life when they need to mind their blinking business.
I don't think it's our responsibility to be tasked with destroying and dismantling the racial oppression that's against us. That's just saying we're more at fault than the white people who constructed this system and the white people who continue to practice institutional racism.
A majority of white people do not support policies that would unpack and unroll and reform this system of justice. This is what they want. Matt Gaetz is giving the white folks what they want.
White replacement can strangle culture. So yes, we should all be concerned about white replacement. It is, after all, a very threat to our survival here.
Is there anything worse than white people? They're violent, they're heartless, they're cruel, they're deranged, they're secretive, they're dishonest. In fact, as you just heard Tiffany Cross say, white people are a mortal danger to you and your loved ones. They threaten your life. Are they poisoning the wells? Are they baking bread with the blood of your children? If not, according to Tiffany Cross and MSNBC, they're fully capable of doing those things. They've certainly done worse. This is Hutu Radio. But But it's not an independent radio station in an African country. It's part of one of the biggest news organizations in the world, part of the biggest telecommunications company in the United States, Comcast, which owns it. So you have to ask yourself, what does Comcast board think of this? Comcast board is mostly white people who, according to the channel they own, decided they wanted something, then they annexed it. White people who steal because they're white people who can, quote, turn to violence when they don't get their way. White people are going crazy, endangering their communities. So you have to ask yourself, why are they putting this on the air? Why are they allowing this? This is not a policy debate. These are open attacks on people, on Americans, on the basis purely of their race. And that's just a selection. We could go on and on and on. Are they aware that this is happening? Perhaps they're not. We weren't, to be fair. But it is happening day after day after day after day. And at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, if it continues and nobody stops it, do they agree with it? Maybe they do. And just in case you think that we are taking Tiffany Cross out of context and pulling the worst quotes from a out of context segment to make her seem crazy and racist, here's more. Here's Tiffany Cross at MSNBC.
Look, a lot of folks in that Capitol insurrection, some of these folks were white women. And I know we're talking a lot about Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, but I do think that some of the white women who adopted this ideology, is America ready to face the fact that some of those folks look like people they have elevated and put on a pedestal of being untouchable? What do you say about this wing of white women who have been radicalized and are enablers to this very dangerous domestic terrorism movement that we've seen increase quite rapidly?
So it's not just whites, it's white women. Their women are bad too. Women, of course, are the key to reproducing the white race, which is clearly a threat, as she says again and again, to you and your family. They're dangerous. They want to hurt you. Now, don't be fooled by the fact that Tiffany Cross can barely speak a coherent sentence. She was a communications major, apparently, according to the internet. That didn't work. But the gist of it is very, very clear. White women are dangerous because white people are dangerous. They are, by the nature of their DNA, potential domestic terrorists. Now, you could play the game, well, if any other group were spoken about this way, this would be shut down immediately. And of course, that's completely true. There's no other group in America you can talk about the way that Tiffany Cross and Joy Reid and other anchors at MSNBC talk about white people. But you don't have to play that game. It doesn't matter what the color is. It's always wrong to reduce people to the color of their skin, to their melanin content, to their DNA, and it's even worse to attack them on the basis of that. And in fact, it's the basis of violence, actual violence. Actual violence. But Tiffany Cross can't be criticized because she's oppressed. That's the key. Watch this.
What we didn't see were enough voices willing to point out the deeper, festering rot that's plagued this nation since it was born. People who neither discovered nor built this land have been led to believe that America is theirs and theirs alone. Will this democracy survive? Well, a Yahoo News poll says no. But perhaps when you build a nation on stolen land with stolen labor, it was never going to be a republic we could keep. And so here we are, celebrating the birth of a nation, independence for white men.
Okay, once again, calling out a specific race by name. Now you have to wonder about the other anchors on MSNBC, some of whom are that race. Do they notice this? Do they know what's happening on their channel? Are they okay with this? What do you think happens if we continue to talk this way? You may not watch that channel, but some people do. What does this look like in a year, or 5 years, or 10 years? What kind of country do you live in? Will a country at war with itself? Race war. This woman, Tiffany Cross, whose clips you've been watching, is so deranged by a racialist worldview that she believes all people of one color are oppressed by all people of another color. And to prove it, she says, even NFL players, some of the richest people in our society, some of the most celebrated, the most famous, the most privileged, even they can't escape the all-pervasive hatred of diabolical whites. Watch this.
I gotta say, my right? The optics just look bad. To see all these black men crashing into each other with a bunch of white owners, white coaches, and the complete disregard of black bodies and black life. I mean, it just represents a larger issue.
So, I mean, look, the average salary for an NFL player is more than $2 million a year. 60% of NFL players are African Americans. In some positions like cornerback, virtually all the first string players are black. So, okay, we don't have a problem with that. Most people don't have a problem with that. But if you look at that picture and say, this is white supremacy, what are you really saying? You're saying that anybody involved in the sport who is white defiles the sport because whiteness is itself inherently corrupting. White people are so evil that their mere presence in a sport that is overwhelmingly African American and from which African American individuals are benefiting is enough to destroy the whole operation because there are whites involved. What kind of talk is that? Well, it's genocidal talk, actually. Not an overstatement. That's exactly what it is. So again, you have to wonder, what does Comcast board think of this? It's not a rhetorical question, really, now that we're talking about sports, because Comcast also owns an NHL team, a hockey team, the Philadelphia Flyers. And maybe not surprisingly, the NHL just published its first ever diversity report. And according to that report, we have a huge problem with hockey. And the problem is there are too many white people in hockey. Now, why is that a problem? No one actually explains. It doesn't need to be explained because it's just prima facie obvious. We've got a lot of white people. That's inherently bad because white people are inherently bad. Again, do you want to live in a country where powerful people talk this way? What do you think it looks like in 5 years? The head of the NHL's, quote, social impact division said, quote, we have a lot of work to do. Again, how does Comcast board feel about this? Will the board undergo some kind of forced diversification? What about the NBA and the NFL? And really, we're not following all of this. But as Joy Reid and Tiffany Cross tell us, that's probably because we're white and too stupid to understand.
I think for Kamala Harris, she's had like the triple problem of being a woman, and so people not being willing to respect her the way they would respect a male vice president, or being black, which we already know that what that carries with it is the anti-blackness comes, with the package, and then also being vice president at a time that is really, really difficult.
Joy and I talk about this all the time. Madam Vice President, and you know this, Charlene, she's black, okay?
Yes.
She went to Howard, she AK, when she talks to you,
Yeah.
it is, I mean, she's
so regular.
She's so regular
She
and
really
approachable,
is.
and it's unfortunate that more people don't see
Yes.
that. And there's also just the dumbing down of the American electorate.
We could go on and on. We could read excerpts from Tiffany Cross's book, which are brimming with racial hostility. We could play you a million clips from Joy Reid, which are exactly the same, filled with open racial hostility. But you get the point. And if you don't believe us, just go ahead and tune into MSNBC. But it's not really about that channel or those hosts. It's about a society that thinks that's okay. Where it's not really about diversity, it's about hating other people on the basis of their race. And it's a little bewildering to the rest of us, but the whole point of America was that we're aspiring to a country where we are judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And all of a sudden, racial reductionists don't simply have the floor and the platform on cable news shows, but have apparently the unquestioning support of the biggest telecommunications company in the United States. What does that say about the country and its leadership? Jason Whitlock is the host of Fearless. He joins us to respond today. Jason Whitlock, thanks so much for coming on. This seems, and I'll just be honest, as noted, I didn't really know this was happening. I'm not all that interested in hearing people talk about race, and I'm definitely not interested in watching that channel. But once you do watch it, you think, how can this be happening and nobody says anything?
Tucker, it's pervasive across corporate media. It's pervasive in the sports world. It's one of the reasons why I left ESPN and Fox Sports, to be quite frank with you, and wanted to do my own independent thing because of the way that we talk about race in the corporate media is very unhealthy. It's very toxic. It's intended. People have been bought and paid for to undermine this country. Tiffany Cross, Joy Reid, any of the other people doing this type of stuff, they know exactly what they're doing. They're doing exactly what they're told to do. They're planting the seeds to make people believe that the American experiment is a failure and the Constitution needs to be rewritten.
That's right.
And they're using race as their disguise. That's the entire agenda here. They're not hiding it. America is a failure in their mind because the outcomes don't meet their demographic criteria or quotas. And so all of this is to bait all of us into a race war and distract us from an attack on America, its Constitution, and primarily it's an attack on God. People get upset that, oh, like Christian nationalism. This country was founded on biblical principles. Period. End of story. This is a biblical experiment, the United States of America, and it has been a success. The atheists, the Marxists, the people hostile to God want to end this biblical experiment, and they're using race to tear it down. That's the nuclear weapon. Race, 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 race. We haven't treated race right. We got to write a new constitution. This whole thing's been a failure. It's a smokescreen. It's an attack on God. Those of us that are believers, regardless of our surface level differences of skin tone, if you're a believer, you got to wake up and look at what they're doing. They're attacking God. You think they're attacking you. They're not. They're attacking God, and they're attacking a country that was founded on biblical principles. Is this country perfect? No way. But it's better than anything else. It's the only biblical experiment that's ever been tried with a nation. The results are better than anybody else has ever gotten. What the steps we've taken in this country to correct our racial problems are steps other countries haven't come close to. This is satanic what they're doing, and they've been paid to do it.
I agree with that completely, and I also worry that once you unleash these forces, boy, you can't control them. This could go in very ugly directions, and I think it's reckless, really reckless. Jason Whitlock, I appreciate your coming on and for that very clear explanation of what's true. I want to bring you now an update.